You know, the irony of the 66th episode of this series being about an album from Drake, the Sixth God, isn't lost on me. Welcome back to 10 Years Later, the series where I talk about albums from the 2010s that were either impactful to me, impactful to music in general, very popular, or just worth revisiting 10 years later for good or bad reasons. And here is a big one, probably one of the biggest that I'm going to talk about from 2011. As you can tell from the title, it's time to talk about Drake's 2011 project, Take Care. Drizzy Drake, the Champagne Papi, released this as his second studio album back in 2011, and what a moment it was. Drake was already coming off of a massive couple of years when his 2009 So Far Gone mixtape, as well as his 2010 debut album Thank Me Later, became major sea changes in hip-hop. Perhaps as much, if not more so, than his contemporaries in Kid Cudi and Kanye West, who helped pave the way for his sound. Drake's style of hip-hop was some of the most emotional and least macho rap music to hit the mainstream. In a genre noted for its artists being very braggadocious and boastful, Drake had that in spades, but he also took more than enough time to dive deep into his emotions, his internal conflicts, and the sides of himself that contradicted themselves. It was almost unbelievably self-deprecating and emasculating, so much so that he became the subject to many memes for not being anything close to the stereotypical tough guy that was so ingrained in hip-hop up to that point. Suddenly, here comes a rapper who's just as much of a singer. Here comes a hip-hop artist who is just as much of an R&B artist. Some saw it as a joke, and yet look where we are now. Drake is still one of the biggest artists in the world, if not the biggest, and several other rappers to follow in his wake also sing. It also probably wouldn't be bold to say that Drake was potentially one of the first big emo rappers, making sad boy rap long before emo rap was a prevailing hip-hop subgenre. This record in particular has gone on to be by far one of Drake's biggest, and in many circles it's argued to be his best. It does carry the typical long length that Drake projects do at 18 tracks stretching about an hour and 20 minutes, but to many listeners this record didn't really contain much filler, and it was home to so many of his best and most remembered songs. Singles like the title track, Marvin's Room, Crew Love, Headlines, the single The Motto from the deluxe edition that I didn't specifically listen to for this video, but I do like that track, and other widely loved deep cuts from fans like Over My Dead Body, Lord Knows, the Buried Alive interlude, Cameras / Good Ones Go, Practice. There are a lot of very beloved songs here. I can say that myself because I previously reviewed this album back in 2018. Going into that first listen, I had enjoyed Thank Me Later and was hopeful that Take Care would be even better, and it sure was. And while Drake has a habit of labeling certain projects as mixtapes, playlists, and anything other than albums, I can say I've considered this my favorite Drake project that he's explicitly classified as an album. And in going back to listen to the record for this video, damn does it still hit. Many of this album's high points I've come back to time and time again. Headlines was one of the first Drake songs that I really fell in love with, and hell, it might have even been the very first Drake song I listened to. It's one of the biggest songs on this record in terms of commercial success, but also in terms of its sound. Unlike many of the mellow R&B driven jams on here, this is a straight up rap banger where Drake sends his message about how he doesn't want to simply be lumped in as radio music. It succeeds, and his confident performance and flow really helps sell that message and allow it to come in a lot better than it might have in something lighter. Top it off with a super catchy hook, and it's easy to see how this became one of Drake's most iconic tracks. On the flip side, Marvin's Room is a cut that is peak Drake. One of his moodiest and haziest R&B tracks ever, and one that got him a lawsuit from Erica Lee, whose vocals were used without Drake giving a proper credit. This is the sad boy song of sad boy songs. Unbelievably full of angst, spitefulness, and heartbreak, this is one of Drake's most emotionally bare songs, which is saying a lot given that he's built himself off of emotionally bare songs. I'll openly admit that throughout much of 2018, the year I reviewed this album, I was dealing with a lot of heartbreak and probably going through the biggest sad boy period of my life. I hadn't sworn off crushes, dating, and love like I mostly have now, and my then hopeless romantic self was feeling heartbroken a lot by crushes. Thus, this song was on constant loop all year long. And even now, it's still a song that I love. What with its downbeat instrumentation, Drake's excellent vocals, and that brilliant piano melody at the end. It's probably far and away one of my favorites that Drake has ever put out. Doing It Wrong was a song that I had randomly discovered before properly reviewing the album. It wasn't any special means, it just popped up on my Pandora once and I liked it, so I kept listening to it. It was another one that got a lot of spins out of me during that sad boy period period, being that it was another super soft, mellow, low-tempo R&B cut featuring more of Drake's crooning over a breakup. It was a wonderfully emotional song that grabbed me from the start and never let go. Also, the Stevie Wonder harmonica solo at the end. Love it. Another moment from Drake's discography that I very much adore. Practice has gotten a ton of spins out of me as well. It's a very spacey, banging hip-hop track built on the flow and cadence of Juvenile's Back That Ass Up. In many ways, you could even argue that this song is a straight-up remix of that one. It obviously has its own unique flair and style to it, but the hook, the flows, and even some of the lyrics are straight-up references to Juvenile's original song. Whether it's a remix or not, it's a track that I just really enjoy. Drake's singing and rapping mix is potent, as is the beat that often feels like it tiptoes along before exploding on the chorus. I know this is a track that's been a favorite for quite a few people, and I am definitely one of those people. And of course, there's Over My Dead Body. I say of course because there's the running idea that every intro track on a Drake album is something special, and this is by far one of my favorites. It's got a super subdued instrumental with that beautiful ethereal vibe that Drake has always been known for creating. Interestingly enough though, despite Drake being widely known for his hooks, he lets Chantal Kreviazek handle the chorus on this one. That's not a bad thing at all because Chantal's vocals are hazy but stunning and beautiful. Looking back on my old review, I'm not sure why I thought Drake sounded like he was doing a Lil Wayne impression though. That probably could just be because Drake was so inspired by him and it often showed in his vocal tone. Either way, his introspection remains very interesting even though there are some lyrics that can be considered pretty gross today. I mean, this one? Yeah. Blech. It's still a very strong intro. And Shot For Me was a song that even though I enjoyed it in my first listen, it took some time to really grow on me and become something I'd go back to frequently. I would come to love just how spacey and mellow the beat was, and I think Drake's sing-rapping mixture was smooth and wonderful as he gets a little bit attitude-driven about his former flames. It's pretty lovely to listen to, and it's a song that's stuck out and gotten way too many repeat listens out of me. Crew Love was also one of the earliest examples of Drake helping to put a rising artist on, and it turned out that artist happened to be none other than The Weeknd. With this coming not too long after Abel released the first two mixtapes in his trilogy, Drake basically started to do what Lil Wayne had done for him previously, offer cosigns to artists in the hopes of allowing them to grow and gain greater success. Obviously, we know where that took Abel, who would go on to provide lots of writing and vocals for this album. Some of this was even meant for Abel's debut tape House of Balloons, and that can show. Sonically, it does fit in the Weeknd style with some of the booming offerings of Drake's style thrown in for good measure. To be honest, I can't even really see Drake making a song of this style right now. It's so at odds with a lot of the stuff he makes today. Even so, the deep, booming, bassy soundscape is absolutely contagious, and Drake does his thing on his verse, but Abel absolutely owns it. It's an absolute banger that's definitely stayed as one of my favorites on the album. Buried Alive Interlude is another example of Drake helping to put on an artist that would go on to do some special things, that being the legend himself, Kendrick Lamar. Fresh off of releasing his excellent debut album, Section 80, which I talked about previously in this series, this track would do even more to help Kendrick get his name buzzing and receive big-time fame. And for a short interlude, this one certainly hits hard. There's a hazy electronic sound that transitions into something very booming and loud, and while Kendrick's vocal tone sounds pretty sad, his flow is stunning. It's extremely bouncy, and the way he rides the beat is just incredible. While this hasn't looped for me quite as much as some of my other favorites on the album, it's a cut that's always a treat to return to. There were also some tracks I had listed as favorites in my original review that didn't get quite as many spins out of me, though that's not because I didn't enjoy them. In fact, returning to this record made me remember how much I did like them. For example, Lord Knows is a track that kicks off with a bit of gospel influence, and I just have to say that choir intro is damn beautiful. Drake's flows are as smooth as ever, as he is built perfectly for this kind of production. Although hearing that lyric where he says that he never hears the disses pointed at him is the type of thing that's aged about as well as a carton of orange juice. If anything, it seems like he more actively listens out for the disses and builds himself around those disses now. Rick Ross is on the song, and he also says this shit. Don't know how I let that one slip in my previous review, but I apologize for that. And that's not his only weird lyric. Let's not forget I fell in love with this pen-started fucking the ink. Hey Ross, you do you, I won't kink shame. Awkward dated lyrics aside though, Ross's flow is pretty strong too. It's been said plenty of times before, but it will be repeated. Drake and Rick Ross are a duo that seem to always put out great music when they link up. This is yet another great example that works despite its dated elements. The Real Her is the type of track that almost feels like a sequel of sorts to Houston, Atlanta, Vegas from Drake's So Far Gone mixtape, though it also has a pair of features in Lil Wayne and most surprisingly Andre 3000. I'm mostly a sucker for Drake tracks where he's crooning over a beat that's built largely over pianos, and this is another example. He comes through with a lot of catchy hooks and some interesting, occasionally faster flows that sound pretty damn great. Lil Wayne's verse is short, but he's got a downbeat tone to his vocals that fits for the track. And Andre 3000 takes an interesting fast flow that sounds a bit offbeat, but still good enough to work here. It might not have gotten the most spins out of any song on the record for me, but it's still one that I very much enjoy. Look What You've Done is an ode to Drake's mother Sandy, his grandmother Evelyn, and his uncle Steve. It's one of his tracks that feels extremely introspective and somber, as while Drake has never been afraid to be either on his music, this feels a lot more intimate and personal. I mentioned in my original review that I'm a sucker for these kinds of personal songs, and I still am. I like the way Drake flows and bears his pain over these pianos that features some emotional vocal samples in the background. Honestly, this is another kind of track that I tend to wonder if modern Drake would be able to pen. I know he's written about very personal topics aplenty, but I just wonder if he could actually write something with this much emotional impact today, or if he has the fire to do so. Man, Certified Lover Boy has made me question a lot of things, hasn't it? Being that this is a pretty long record, there were some tracks I wasn't quite as into in my previous review, and even if I like them a little more now, many of my thoughts remain the same on them. The title track, Take Care, is one that I've had a complicated relationship with. A collaboration with none other than Rihanna. This was once one of the earliest Drake songs that I really liked, and there's still a lot of things I quite like about it. It's banging, but also mellow. Rihanna's vocals on the chorus are very nice, and Drake's sing-rapping on his verses is some of my favorite stuff he's done. I won't demonstrate because of my crippling self-consciousness over my voice, but the two verses on this track are some of my favorite Drake verses to sing rap to. The big thing that really brings the song down for me though is the Gil Scott-Heron interlude. I know it's a seemingly minor part of the song, but it kind of kills my replayability of it. Whenever I listen to it, I just kind of stop when it gets there, and I think the song probably would have been better off without it. It's still enjoyable enough, but I just wish I could have given it more replays. Underground Kings was one of Drake's odes to his city and his crew, and it was also a bit of a tribute to Pimp C. I mentioned in my original review that I wasn't as crazy about this because it sounded very similar to a lot of Drake's other stuff, and while I don't totally disagree now, I can say the song is held back a bit by a few other things. While I think the production is bright and boastful, it just doesn't stick out as much as some of the best cuts here. And without an amazing hook to speak of, much of the song just ends up being carried by the fact that Drake's faster flow is pretty compelling. It's still a decent banger, but I can't say it grew on me much in my repeat listen. Will Be Fine was the track I had initially listed as my least favorite in my original review. Hell, looking back at that review, there were quite a few things I didn't like about it back then. Listening to it now, while I don't think I dislike it quite as much as I did before, I can still comfortably label it as my least favorite. While the vocal samples in the background are a nice addition to the instrumental, and I find the production to be a little less contrived than I did in 2018, I still have a few qualms about Drake's flow, especially the start-stop feel of it. And again, the hook, I don't even know if I can call it that because it doesn't hook. I also mentioned in my original review that Birdman's appearance felt like one of those he's there to be there moments, and yeah, I still find that to be the case now. Even after several years, I still think of this as my least favorite on the record. Make Me Proud is a collaboration with Nicki Minaj where Drake expresses how proud he is of her, and while this one was released as a single back in 2011, it was one that I wasn't totally crazy about. Listening now, I don't think it really grew on me all that much. I mentioned in my original review that some of the lyrics bordered into cringe territory, and honestly, I couldn't tell you which ones I was talking about then. Not that I don't stand by that point, but I just can't think of if any particular lines did that for me. Either way, many of my other previous points I do stand by. Over another booming loud beat, Drake rapid fires through his flows, which is not a bad thing, even if it might be a little bit off-putting at first. The pre-chorus also intrigued me because the way Drake sings the "You Got It" part almost reminds me of what he would go on to do on No Guidance with Chris Brown. It's a shame the actual chorus still doesn't click with me. I like Drake's vocals on it, but the repetitive I'm so just still sounds awkward. At least I could still say Nicki Minaj runs away with this song. With a performance like this, I'd be proud of her too. Camera/Good Ones Go Interlude is the album's lone two-part track, and it supposedly is even labeled as a medley on Spotify, which makes me wonder if there were releases where the two songs were separate. 2018 Matt probably would have wished the two tracks were separate because he preferred the Good Ones Go interlude a lot more than Cameras, and I'd say that opinion still applies for me today. The first part, Cameras, is more of a low-key banger where Drake raps in a more downbeat kind of way that almost feels a bit emotionless. I do think there are moments that are enjoyable about it, most especially the beautiful bridge and the way it samples Calling on You by John B, but otherwise that first part doesn't grab me as much as I want it to. The Good Ones Go interlude sees Drake in his prime form, simultaneously telling a girl not to wait for him, but also telling her not to get married. Classic Drake. classic. The track itself does play more into the R&B vibes, with Drake getting more singy on us and The Weeknd even having some light vocals here and there. I'm a sucker for R&B Drake, so I do enjoy this half of the track a lot, but again, I'd probably prefer it a bit more if it was its own cut. I do like Cameras a bit more now, though just not enough to make this two-parter a favorite. HYFR, Hell Yeah Fucking Right, is a track that even back in my original review I found was really weird in the context of the album as a whole. Being the immediate follow-up to Look What You've Done, a very emotionally bare and raw song, having Drake just follow that up with this banging, upbeat, almost electronic influenced track feels kinda weird. It's probably the weirdest transition on the entire album, and it makes me wonder if Look What You've Done should have closed the album, or at least been placed much closer to the end. Either way, HYFR has some good things going for it, from Drake's rapid firing throughout his verses, even though there are points where it sounds like he's kinda struggling to ride the beat, and Lil Wayne's guest verse, though once again I don't really enjoy the hook. The melody of it just isn't that catchy, though I do still prefer the way Drake handles it over Wayne thanks to his smoother vocals. And The Ride is the closer to the album, and one of the many tracks that had a good amount of influence from The Weeknd. You can honestly feel it all throughout the song. Much of the soulful vocal sampling in the background feels like Abel himself, and I think he really dominates the song. I do still wish, though, that the hook itself was a bit more interesting, but still, at least it has a nice minimal instrumental, and Drake's discussion of his general ups and downs is pretty interesting. Still not a huge favorite of mine, but it's a solid end to the record. Overall, my return to Take Care yielded a lot of the same results as my first listen back when I reviewed the album in 2018, which is a very good thing because I love this album. Drake takes a lot of the hip-hop and R&B fusions of Thank Me Later and polishes them up fantastically. His vocals are even smoother than before, the production feels even more grand and hard-hitting, and despite a few awkwardly written moments here and there, he still shows an ability to craft some memorable bars and pick out some pretty amazing features. If So Far Gone and Thank Me Later were Drake's opportunities to throw his new sound and style into the ring, Take Care was his moment where he proved that those were not flukes. Drake was here to stay, and the music world wasn't getting rid of him that easily. It's filled with some of his most emotionally resonant and memorable hits to this day, and it's a moment where Drake bears all of his conflicting, contradictory emotions in a really meaningful way. In my research, I found that the New York Times said back in 2011 that in the future an album like this will be commonplace. Today, it's radical. And yeah, they weren't kidding. Even so, as much as Drake's sound and style have influenced others, this project is still a great listen today. And while emotional R&B rap fusions have become more common, that hasn't taken away from the sheen of this wonderful project. Back in 2011, I liked a few of the singles from this thing, so I feel like I could have actually enjoyed the project as a whole. When I listened to it in 2018, I thought it was one of Drake's best works, and listening to it now, I still think that. Back in 2018, I gave the album an excellent rating, and yeah, I can pretty much stick to that now. Drake's best album that's actually classified as a studio album, and still by far one of my favorite things he's put out. But that's just my opinion on the album. What did you guys think about it? Did you listen to it back in 2011? Do you still listen to it now? Did you love it back then? Hate it back then? Do you still love it now? Do you still hate it now? Are you just completely indifferent towards it? And where would you rank it among Drake's other albums? Whatever your thoughts and experiences are, leave them down in the comments below. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe and support some of my other ventures that I have linked in the description, thank you. If not, it's no big deal. I totally understand. I have one more video in 10 Years Later to film today, and it's going to be on Childish Gambino's Camp. I'm already running out of breath from this video, so hopefully I won't be running out of breath too much in that one. So stay tuned for that, but until then, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Peace. It succeeds, and his confidence performance, that's English, I promise. What with its downbeat instrumentation, Drake's excellent vocals, and that brilliant piano melody. Try again. With this coming not long after Abel released his first two mixtapes in the trilogy, Bake. Shout out to Bake. It's my favorite artist, Bake. There's a hazy electronic sound that transitioned to... sorry. There's a hazy electronic sound that transitions... I am struggling. Jeez. So stay tuned for that, but until then, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. What did I just do? I gotta try that again. Even the outro. I messed up the outro, too. This video's been bad.